Therapy versus counseling. Which one is actually better for you? What would you say if I told you that neither one was good for you? Hear me out. We have to question the mainstream narrative around mental health if we ever hope to break this cycle that we're in, this downward spiral that we have as humanity. We're seeing the worst atrocities playing out on our phones in live streams on a daily basis, yet we're still distracted by our privilege rather than our duty, our accountability, our humanness. And this is not about politics, so don't think that this is going to get political. This is about the human experience and how it is that we've actually abandoned our humanness in favor of what it is that we think we need to do to be better humans. People often ask me about therapy and ask me if I'm a therapist, or they refer to me as a therapist. And I generally avoid those terms. I avoid all the terms that relate to therapy, counseling, coaching, and all of that, because the moment you adopt that position, you lose sight of the human. You lose sight of the human because the human is not broken or faulty or needs fixing. They need understanding. So if you're going to take an approach that is almost based on the assumption that there's something wrong with the individual that you're working with, automatically your focus is going to be on correcting what is wrong with them. And if you're correcting what is wrong with them, that means you have a preconceived idea of what right should look like. You also have a preconceived idea about what it is that should be their value system and the principles by which they should be living. What if you're wrong about all of that? What if your take on whether something is right or wrong about them is completely wrong in the first place because you went in with an assumption that you didn't realize you were making, instead of going in with curiosity to understand what it is that was happening within their headspace? What is the context within which they were experiencing a certain situation? So this is important for someone who is struggling and looking for advisors and looking for therapists or counselors or coaches or whatever it is to be able to assist you out of that emotional duress that you're experiencing. That's becoming debilitating, that's overwhelming, that you just can't understand why it has such a hold on you, why something that you experienced a long time ago is still affecting you today. And the one thing that I always come back to, and I think I covered this in previous episodes, but let's touch on it again. The one thing that we always do when something happens, when something goes wrong, and it's always when something goes wrong, when something is unpleasant, never when something is good. When something good happens to us, we don't say, oh, why me? When something bad happens to us, then it's why me? Or why did they do that? Or why didn't they do that? Or why didn't they show up for me? Or why did this have to happen in this way to me? What did I do to deserve this? And what is the underlying plea in all of that? Is understanding why. Now someone experiences duress. We experience the overwhelming emotional impact of that because it disrupts our view of what we thought we could expect from life, our safety, our emotional composition, our emotional safety, our grounding point. It disrupts all of that. It breaks our trust in the flow of life, in the relationships that we have. That's all shattered because of this one experience that we might have had. And then you go to someone and they say, well, you're broken. We need to fix you. I won't say it in those kind of words. Some people might be callous enough to be that brutal or blunt about it. But for the most part, what they're going to say is you need therapy or you need counseling. Why don't you go and get therapy so that you can be better than this? You don't need therapy. You need to understand why. And understanding why doesn't mean therapy. It means understanding why. Now, why this is important, pardon the pun, is because if you don't set out to understand why, the next best thing you have is to understand how you're going to cope after you've experienced that. And that is the biggest problem of all, because coping will always fail you in ways that you won't understand and will create new problems that you never intended to create. Because here's what happens when we cope. When we cope, it means that we're still defined by the duress that we experienced. And it also means that we have to exert ourselves in just coping. And that's how you end up in a state where you look at people and you think, you don't know what I've been through, so don't judge me. Okay, you've been through it, you're not going through it. Why is it still affecting you? because you don't know how I experience it, you don't know what it means for me, you don't know what loss I experienced, you don't know how it is that the betrayal was so hurtful, all of those things. And no one's dismissing the impact of it. I'm asking you to consider why it is that something that you're no longer going through is still affecting you. That's all. It's not to say that you're wrong or you're right or you good or you're bad or you're weak or you're strong for bracing yourself with it so long after the effect of what it is that you experienced. But you should be asking yourself that question. Why is it that you're still struggling with something that is no longer present in your life? When you can answer that question meaningfully, with substance, with understanding, where it connects the dots and answers a lot of things that remain unanswered for you, immediately the overwhelming mental clutter, the emotional duress, and everything else dissipates. It just eases up. Why? Because you now understand why. Why is understanding why so important? Because when you understand why, you stand a better chance of navigating it in a more effective way next time. If you're faced with a problem that you have to solve on a daily basis and yesterday you didn't solve it, so how are you going to feel about solving it today? You're not going to feel optimistic or confident. For the first couple of days, you might think, well, we'll figure it out. Hey, we'll figure it out. Okay, didn't get it right on day 3. We'll figure it out on day 4, and so on, until eventually you start questioning your competence. And you start questioning your relevance, your significance. You start questioning what it is that life is written for you. You start questioning fate and destiny and taqdeer and kismet and karma and all of those things. And you start convincing yourself that if you deserved better, you would get better. So maybe you don't deserve it. So what kind of person does that make you? And this is all the kind of nonsense, clutter and noise that results from not understanding why. So if you keep making the same mistake, understand that it means that from the first time you made that mistake to the last time you made that mistake, there's a lesson in there that you're not learning. And that's not therapy, that's not counseling, that's understanding. That's about reflection, introspection. And I'm not saying you don't need a therapist or you don't need a counselor. Understand the difference between needing therapy and counseling versus needing to understand why. And when you choose someone to help you to understand, and just be clear about what you're getting from them. Because if you're not clear about what you're getting from them, you're going to have a misplaced confidence about being able to deal with that in future. Now, why is this important? Why is this accountability for how it is that we feel after the fact? Why is that important? Because you become part of the very cycle that nailed you, that beat you up with that experience. You become part of that cycle if you become defined by that experience. Just bear with me on this. The person that might have treated you badly didn't treat you badly because of who you are. They treated you badly because of what you represented to their demons, their past demons, their insecurities, their vulnerabilities, their bitterness, their anger from what happened to them in their past. You provoked that about them, and that's why they lost themselves to needing to make sure that you're not going to treat them the way someone else treated them before. And it's not to say that the role you played is similar to a role someone else played before. So we think that maybe if it's a problem they're having in a relationship with a significant other, that it must have been another significant other in a similar kind of relationship that they kind of recovering from. No. Life is about themes, emotional themes. So when you recognize the emotional themes, it makes it easier for you to understand why it is that something completely unrelated, like road rage, unrelated to the daily events of your life. Why does it feel the same way? Because that's why we rage. We eventually lose our tolerance level and our capacity to want to deal with something, to be patient and tolerant about something, and then we explode. Why? Because we're tired of feeling disrespected, feeling invisible or irrelevant or insignificant or whatever it is that we felt because of how we've been treated consistently. And then now a stranger comes along or a colleague comes along and they treat us in a way that we feel the same way again. They don't make us feel, we feel that way because of how they're behaving. And then that just feels one too many times. And because we're in a victim headspace already by that point, we believe we have to protect ourselves from being taken advantage of. And that's where we justify our bad behavior in response to someone else's bad behavior or someone else's insensitivity. So when you go about looking for therapy and counseling and coping mechanisms and tools and exercises and all of these things, it doesn't resolve that. It will tell you how to restrain yourself, compose yourself, manage your expressions, manage your feelings and all of these things. It will make you more competent at being able to navigate those kinds of situations, but it doesn't help you to understand why it is that you need the tool or the exercise to do it, instead of just in the moment deciding, okay, I get what's going on here and this is how I'm going to deal with it. Because that's what we need, right? The coping mechanisms distract you from that ability. Coping mechanisms distract you from the fact that you are capable of figuring it out in the moment. So a coping mechanism establishes the mindset that you have to be prepared. And if you have to be prepared about everything, guess what? You're going to need to control everything, or at least those parts of your life that are really important for you not to drop the ball in, not to fail at. Because the consequences of failure might be just too great for you to even contemplate. And it's not necessarily consequences because there'll be material damage or something. It could be just because of reputation, of perception, of how you think others are going to see you. And that then provokes your fears. And when you're fearful about what would happen if you don't, you then become that much more rigid and hard and inflexible and demanding and prescriptive and all of those horrible things about how something has to be done because you can't afford for it not to go the way you need it to go. Therapy has its place, but it's not going to give you a sustainable solution. Same with counseling, same with coaching. And again, I know it sounds kind of ironical or even contradictory coming from me because I'm a coach. But I always tell my clients, and I always tell everyone I speak to, that I'm not here to coach you, because coaching is a very prescriptive way of approaching things. And I'm sure some coaches out there will disagree with me on this, but happy to have that conversation. The point is, if I don't approach your difficulty with as much curiosity as you should have about your difficulty, then I'm going to come in with a solution for you to implement because the solution worked for someone else. Now, there's benefit in that. I'm not saying there isn't benefit in that, but understand what it means. It means that the real reason for you having been impacted by something the way you have been, that would never be fully resolved, which means you now just developed and established a blind spot. But a blind spot that you now wrote off. You don't consider it anymore. Because you have a coping mechanism, and that coping mechanism is going to hold you in good stead in relationships going forward. And that's why you get people that preemptively write others off because they look narcissistic, they look bipolar, they look like this, they look like that, they're toxic and all of that. And that's why we must cut out our parents, we must cut out our children, we must cut out all of these people that are so bad for us and everything else. We're trying to be human while being inhuman. We're trying to develop our empathy and compassion while we completely removing it from the occasion, from the equation when we consider how it is that we need to show up for others or how others might be showing up for us. When you lose sight of your own humanity, you will lose sight of the humanity in the people around you. And that's where we're at. As a populace, as a global population of humans, we lack empathy and compassion. We only find ourselves drawn to people who share our causes, who share our preferences, who share our values that we think are correct and superior to other people's values. And that's why we've got so much of divides and so much of contention between different demographics and groups and things like that. Anyway, the impact of developing coping mechanisms is not only that it hinders your growth, it effectively ties you down into that space. So understand, as long as you have to maintain that coping mechanism, it might feel like growth because, hey, yesterday I was so nervous in this situation, say public speaking or something along those lines, and today I've got a coping mechanism, so now I can imagine people sitting in the audience naked so it doesn't intimidate me anymore. It's ridiculous. It doesn't resolve the issue of why it is that you feel fear about presenting content or speeches or anything like that in front of an audience in the first place. That's the problem you need to solve, is why is it that you're gripped with fear about potential outcomes that are out of your control? And maybe it's the out of control part that actually triggers you. And then you need to understand why is it that you need control. And usually we need control because we don't trust ourselves to deal with unexpected stuff. And the reason we don't trust ourselves to deal with it is because the risk of getting it wrong, we think, is too high. So we can't afford to get it wrong, so that's why we're going to go for safe. And safe looks like control, predictability, rules. That doesn't help us. It doesn't grow us as humans. The other problem with the lack of accountability, with coping mechanisms that come along with it, is that we will be well-intentioned in how it is that we want to show up. But we don't realize that the moment we do that, we place a burden on others around us to respect our coping mechanisms. If I need to handle something in a specific way, then you need to respect that this is what is important to me. What is important to you? Your problem, not mine. I've got a coping mechanism that I need because you know how difficult this is for me. And then suddenly you have to prevail because your emotional duress is more important or more severe than the other person's, and they must just pack away their emotions because they're not suffering from what you're suffering. They don't know what you've been through. You've been through so much that they can't possibly compare to it and all of those sorts of things. And that's why we then start making excuses for ourselves while judging others. There is no good outcome with coping mechanisms. It will be a short-term gain at best. And the reason why coping mechanisms will always fail you, it's just a matter of time. It will always fail you because your coping mechanism is developed within a specific context of your life. And anyone who's paying attention knows that life changes on a daily basis. And given enough time, if you're not paying attention, you'll end up with surprises, nasty surprises, because you didn't see things coming, because you were focused on what needed to be the same from day to day, not what was changing from day to day. Because if you're in a victim headspace, and people hate when I say victim headspace because they think it has such a negative connotation of that. It's not. If you believe that you're on the receiving end of life, if life is happening to you, if people are happening to you, if your emotions are happening to you, that's a victim headspace because you're on the receiving end. You're not in a master kind of headspace where you are looking at how it is that you can influence outcomes, how it is that you can facilitate, mediate, coordinate. You're not looking to exercise agency. You're looking to react, cope. That's exhausting. That's why so many people struggle with energy, and then they think, no, it's just a busy lifestyle and it's just the demands of work, and we've got this super high productivity levels because of modern work environments and things like that. So we need supplements and everything. It's rubbish. It's not that. You don't have to live on supplements. If you are dependent on supplements, if you're dependent on stimulants, then you know that there's something that's out of whack in your life. You're lacking balance in something important, and you don't have a genuine conviction and interest and passion about what it is that you're doing. So you're doing things because you have to do it to avoid consequences, not because you want to do it because you look forward to it. There's no one that's been difficult to get going on something that they were passionate about. Truly passionate. Not someone who's just genuinely something intrigues them, but they're too afraid to do something about it because they're afraid of failure. That's not passion. Passion is where failure and fear just doesn't even matter because you're so passionate about the value in the outcome of what it is that you want to create. And it looks like all of these things are kind of disparate and I'm all over the place, but it all comes together, I promise you. Our fears distract us from who we are, and it keeps us pinned in a space relative to what we experienced. And the moment you do that, you've got your fears that's always in the back of your mind that you are now navigating the current moment to make sure you avoid it. You mustn't be affected by that thing again. Someone mustn't treat you that way again. So someone can be completely innocent, they can be completely oblivious to the impact they're having, but you'll accuse them of being toxic or being bad or being manipulative just because they're approaching something in a way that triggers you. And that trigger that we talk about, that's yours to own. If you're putting a button on your chest and you're telling people, press me, and they press it, you're responsible for that. You can't blame them for pressing it because you're making the button available, right? It's here, here, go ahead, trigger me, and you'll see what you get. You must choose who you want to be. And you're not going to be able to do that if you don't understand why you are in the space that you're in. So the most heinous experiences don't have to define who you choose to be going forward. You just need to understand why it is that it affects you the way it does, and sometimes you need to understand why it is that it happened in the first place. When you get those answers, automatically you don't have mental illnesses and disorders and all of these things and triggers and stuff. You just have understanding, wisdom, and inspiration for how it is that you want to improve things going forward. How it is that you might want to be able to influence a different way of life, a different way of doing things, a different custom or tradition in your family, because you recognize that the old ways is out of date or is somewhat obstructive or even unhealthy in the current context. Because remember, life changes. So tradition is important, but if it's not adapted to ensure relevance towards achieving what was originally intended to achieve, which is usually family unity and social cohesion and all of those wonderful things, if it no longer does that and you're holding on to tradition for tradition's sake, then you've lost sight of what is really important about that tradition. You've lost sight about yourself, about what's important, about what you want to achieve in life. Does all of this make sense? I don't know. I'm also questioning myself here right now. But here's the thing. The one thing that I've seen repeatedly is that people who go for interventionist type of therapies and modalities and things like that, when they're struggling with emotional duress or struggling to make sense of life or navigate life, they usually end up being more difficult to reason with than anything else. Not because they are bad people, but because they become so invested in that interpretation of life that anyone who disagrees with it, part of the problem, they write them off. An intervention strategy will only ever alleviate where you are at. So say, for example, you go for things like NLP, CBT, or TRE, or any one of these modalities that have emerged over the last few years, or a couple of decades, even hypnotherapy for that matter. All it will do is, it will almost like press a reset button for you about that specific emotional experience, if it even manages to achieve that. So it will reset how it is that you feel about yourself in this moment. But you know what it doesn't do? It doesn't equip you to ensure that you don't get to that point again. And that's what happens, is that we experience those themes I talked about earlier, those emotional themes, that recurs in different experiences from different angles in ways that you never see coming. That you only see it in hindsight. You reflect on it, and then you see how it is that this situation at work made you feel like that situation when you were a child. Or this situation at home in your relationship with your partner made you feel like that situation in a previous relationship. That it doesn't solve that problem. Because all it does is it tries to convince you that you're not the problem. And here's a modality, here's an intervention, here's a tool that you can implement and a coping mechanism that you can use so that you don't feel overwhelmed by this. It's like people trying to solve panic attacks, anxiety. Sensory experiences, touch something and feel the texture so that you can like bring yourself back. No, that's a coping mechanism. That means that you always have to be on alert for the fact that you're going to have a potential panic attack so that you can remember to breathe and you can remember to touch something and you can remember to focus on a certain smell or a sound. No, that's not life. That's what coping looks like. And coping, it denies you the sweetness of life because you can never have a true trust that life is going to be sweet or that there's going to be something to look forward to, because you're always going to be, I want to do that, but I hope this doesn't happen. I hope I don't make a fool of myself by having some or other emotional breakdown in front of other people or whatever it is. Whatever those fears are in the back of your mind, that will always taint your experiences of life. So if you experience joy about something, and that joy on a scale of 1 to 10, you experience is maybe a 5 or a 6, and to you, because your life is generally at a 1 or a 2, that feels amazing. But you don't know that you're not experiencing the other 5 or 6 points above that of what you could take joy from that experience, because it's so contaminated by all your past experiences. Now, when that happens, remember there are people that you're going to be interacting with or exposed to that have no clue about all of the other stuff. But not only that, they also have no accountability for it. And now because you're coping and you are restraining yourself and you are anxious about what it is that mustn't go wrong and all of that, what you do is you taint their experience with you. And that right there is what happens about parenting and the parent-child relationship. And then that person who had a tainted experience with you because they didn't understand what you were going through, they look at you and you think, there's something wrong with you. I need to create distance here because I need to protect my mental health. And then they write you off. And then you feel even more betrayed because, like, you don't know how difficult it was for me to just experience that 5 out of 10 with you and you discarding me. But that 5 out of 10 was my entire world. And for them, it's like, only 5 out of 10? Sorry, that's not good enough. I need at least an 8 out of 10 in the joy that I want to receive from my partner and things like that. And that's how we lose ourselves to this coping approach to life. Why must we cope? Life is so fascinatingly amazing. And yet we spend most of our time trying to convince people why it is that they mustn't expect more from us. Why it is that they owe us and we have a certain right to claim things, and it's tiring, it's exhausting. Why don't people see how exhausting it is to live life that way instead of constantly going for these coping mechanisms and believing in this absolute absurdity of mental illness and mental disorders? There is literally no science to support it. It's not just my opinion of it. It's not a philosophy I'm maintaining. There is zero science to support mental illness. Zero. But there is more than enough evidence to confirm that the moment you expose yourself to new information, you experience life differently. It's called neuroplasticity. If you want to look at it from the brain perspective, the brain reacts to it. It reacts to the new information. So what does it tell you? When you understand why, you inform yourself. It's new information, and that changes what you expect from the next moment because now you have more information. Live life curiously. Don't live life with fear. It's your curiosity that got you this far in life. It is not the fear that you were avoiding things that got you that far. Think about it. Think about how insane this entire approach is. Fear is what drives you to be curious about the solution you need to implement to protect yourself from the fear. And you're so focused on the fact that, hey, we dodged that bullet, that you don't realize that what you were actually believing you were incapable of was exactly what you did to overcome that fear or to mitigate that fear. Does it make sense? It's like the same thing with control. Control is one of the biggest coping mechanisms out there. The more you try to maintain control and predictability, the more you lose sight of the fact that to be able to establish that control, you have to create order out of chaos. And then you convince yourself that chaos is bad, so you need order, which is good. No. The only time I can ever think of a good reason to establish structure and habits as well, not just structure. The only time it's good to do that is if you don't want to solve the same problem twice. So you want to have efficiency. So you don't want to go every day and learn how to drive a car, right? So you form habits, and they want to call it muscle memory and all of that, whatever. The point is, it becomes habitual for how it is that you navigate the controls to navigate your car through traffic and through different situations. That's because there's no value in figuring out that problem every day. So if you have a routine at home about how you're getting ready for work or how you're preparing breakfast or preparing a meal, you'll have certain habits of what you do because it's efficient to get it done. Why? Because the purpose of your life is not invested in solving that problem every single day. You don't need to get creative every single day with that because that's where you're getting your fulfillment from. But life experiences, interactions, relationships, creating something out of nothing, creating something that's of value, that doesn't need control. That needs curiosity. It needs conviction. It needs excitement, enthusiasm. Because in achieving that, that's where joy comes from. Joy doesn't come from having the same habits every day. All it does is it's the absence of problems. That's it. And ask anyone who has just the absence of problems going for them and nothing more, and see if they're happy about life. They might not be miserable, but in fact they might even grow to be miserable because there's nothing to look forward to. Because every day is the same old. Groundhog Day. Until you break the pattern and you experience something that you didn't experience before, life is boring. But here we are protecting ourselves from new experiences so that the new experiences can be very controlled and predictable and manageable and manipulated. We're killing ourselves. We're killing our spirit. We're killing our sense of self. We're killing our enthusiasm for life. And worse than all of this, we're killing the human within us, which is why we struggle to show up as humans for each other these days. I don't even know if there's a point to this episode or not. What you take from it is hopefully something good. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that if you're going to lose yourself into believing that there's something wrong with you, you are diminishing your humanness and you are downplaying the impact of life on who you are. Understand what that impact is. And you'll realize that you are not defined by it, and that what you choose to define about life going forward is entirely in your hands. It's up to you. But if you're going to be fixated on what happened to you in the past, you're never ever going to look at new experiences in the future. And as a result of that, you're going to be in a self-fulfilling prophecy. That cycle is going to be ongoing because you'll keep on that hamster wheel. You're going to keep looking at yesterday's problems, how it affects today's demands, and you're going to be going through mitigating and facilitating and mitigating and trying to figure out how to cope with it, and tools and journaling and all of these things. But you're not solving the problem of why you're in that state in the first place. That's why coaching, therapy, counselling, if it's not geared towards helping you to understand why, it is going to hold you back in life. And when it holds you back in life, you won't realize it's holding you back, because you're going to feel the relief of being able to cope with life now, or feeling like you had a weight lifted, and you're going to be confident, but with a misplaced confidence, because you're not going to become any more in tune with the impact that you have on the people around you, because your focus is going to be on how well you're doing in life, not how well you are impacting other people's lives. We need to rethink the entire mental health paradigm that currently prevails in the mainstream. It is causing more problems than anything else. We're seeing the Western culture implode because of it. They themselves, the honest ones within their own ranks in the mental health spaces, are admitting that hyper-individuality is destroying society. But yet we're still subscribing willingly to that kind of mentality. It doesn't make sense. Make it make sense for me, please. I want to understand. If I'm missing something important here, please point it out. Understanding why is the greatest gift you can ever have, because that is what informs you with wisdom about past experiences, so that you can bring it to bear on creating something amazing in the future. The greater your understanding of what it is you're trying to create, the more effective and the greater the potential of achieving those outcomes. And it's when you apply yourself with that kind of passion and conviction and consistency, it's when you achieve those outcomes, that value you wanted to create, that's where the joy of life is. That's where happiness lies. You can't choose to be happy. You can't choose to be joyful. You have to do things of which the outcomes create a moment of joy. And if you think that serving yourself before serving anyone else is the right way to go about life, you're horribly mistaken. Look at anyone who is self-serving, and you'll see that the reason why they are bitter, or why they are abrasive or narcissistic and all of that nonsense, is because they don't believe that they're enough for the people around them. So if you're going to go through life serving yourself before anything else, because that's what the mainstream tells you, take care of yourself first and all of that, you're going to lose the plot horribly, and you're going to live with a lot of regret later on, because you're going to realize that part of the joy of life is in knowing that you improved the lives of those around you. It's not because you achieved great things on your own. I hope that was of value, and I hope you take that as a pause to reflect, introspect, own your contribution to your life, and own your emotional disposition. And don't judge yourself for it, and don't judge others for it. Understand. And when you seek to understand, that's where you will tap into who you are as a human, rather than who you have to be as a role player. Take care. I'm Zaid Ismail, and I look forward to your feedback on this.